Student performance.
Passing out some documents that will be helpful during this presentation in order to keep track of some of the things I'm going to be talking about. So the district APR report, APR stands for Annual Performance Report. I will probably call it APR throughout the whole thing with the acronyms that we get used to. A little bit about the APR. This is the single point of accountability for school districts within the state of Missouri, which makes it a pretty weighty document. If you see media reports about school districts being unaccredited, losing their accreditation, it is because of their score on this performance report. So this does carry a lot of weight with it. It is intended to be built on 3 years worth of data to give you a snapshot of district performance. We'll talk a little bit tonight about some problems with 3 years worth of data that we've mentioned previously, but I'll show you where that shows up in our APR. I will also refer tonight to MAP performance indexes. That is the scale by which our student performance is judged. For those of you that have been around following school accountability for several years, we used to use the percent of students who scored proficient or advanced on assessments. We no longer use that measure. We use the MAP performance index. And so the charts that I gave you there, I'm hoping will help put those into perspective a little bit. The original targets built on this were based on the Top 10 by 20 initiative that DEC had going just a few years ago. And so you'll see a term through here called 2020 targets throughout this. That 2020 target was the target that the state had set that if our kids hit, we would be performing as a top 10 state in the nation. So those 2020 targets are pretty aggressive. They are very high standards. Again, that's a performance level that would represent a top 10 in the nation, but some of the terminology in here seems a little strange, but the 2020 targets, that's where it comes from, is the top 10 by 20. At one point, the DEC would recognize districts for distinction in performance, accredited with distinction in performance. That no longer exists. So if any of you are wondering about the certificates that we used to get, we no longer have that. So, but it was based on this APR. I'll be talking mostly about the district level report. We will take a quick look at building level reports at the end of this. Some of this information you heard during the school improvement planning process during the October and November meetings. Typically, you would have seen this prior to the CSIP meetings. However, due to the problems that we've talked about before with the assessments, this is a delayed release. In fact, we got this a week ago. I believe actually this doesn't come out of embargo until tomorrow, as far as for public release. But we're speaking about it tonight, so we'll be a little bit early. Okay. So first of all, there are 5 standards on the APR, each with a certain number of points possible based on our district performance. We will look at all 5 of these tonight in detail. I would call your attention to Standard 1 and Standard 2 are all around student achievement on state assessments. And if you add those 2 points possible up, that's 70 points out of the possible 140. Half of this score is based on student achievement. And we will go through those details and how that's calculated as we get through. But these are the 5 goals that districts are assessed on. So first, let's start talking about Standard 1, academic achievement. You'll hear me talk about status, progress, and growth. In this standard, I kind of enjoy this being a math teacher, to be honest with you, because this takes educational philosophy. This takes educational philosophies of what it means to be a good school. And the debate around being a good school centers around, does a good school mean that you have high performance? If that's what it means, that's the term status that we're going to refer to. A level of high performance you can earn points for status. Or does being a good school mean moving kids forward a long way from where they started from. So not necessarily the same high performance, but moving kids and improving over time. That's the progress and growth. So what this report tries to do is it tries to take those philosophies of recognizing different ways to be a good school, both through high performance and through moving kids forward and attaching them to a number and a score report. So status will be high performance, progress and growth will be moving kids ahead over time and improving student performance. The handout that I gave you, this is the first page. This is standard one, what we call the status targets. This is the measurement of how your kids are performing overall on state assessments. So on ELA, Math, Science, and Social Studies, those numbers represent the MAP Performance Index that I referenced earlier. And these are the different ranges of performance. The highest range of performance is the 2020 target. So if we would score that MAP Performance Index, that means that we're scoring at a level top 10 in the nation. On track, approaching, and floor are just little steps down toward getting to that 2020 target. These targets go up every year, so the on track for this year is higher than the on track was for last year because this was all building toward 2020, originally how this was built. And so it was a little progressive increase in expectations each year until you got to that 2020 target. Now, the MAP Performance Index, just to get some perspective. Every advanced score that we get on a state assessment, advanced is the highest level. Each student who gets an advanced score, that advanced score is worth 5 points. So in other words, if 100% of our kids scored advanced, we would get a perfect MPI, would be 500, would be the highest possible score. The lowest possible score is a below basic, that's worth 1 point. So if all of our kids scored below basic, we would receive a 100. And so the range is in between there from 100 to 500 is how our student performance is judged, and it factors in the number of kids who score advanced, next level down is proficient, then basic, below basic. The more kids that you have at a higher level, the higher point values those are worth, the higher MAP Performance Index you have. So you can see the range of what's considered exceptional. The 2020 target is mid to upper 300s. And then it works down below there. Anything below 300 is considered the floor. And so there's a range in between. I would ask you, you may want to keep this out as we look at this next page so that you can kind of look at our performance where it fits in these different ranges. So this is our performance in each of the 4 curriculum areas. This is on page 68 of your packet also, but it's in the form of the supporting data documents that DEC provides. So what I've done is take that information from that supporting data document and try and present it in a little simpler to understand mode here. So across ELA, what you'll see is 3 years of MAP performance indexes. We then take a 3-year average of our performance. So for this year, our 3-year average is 374.6. You can look at the document that I put in your hands on the status targets, and you can see that 374.6 puts us in the on-track category. Okay? We do earn points for our performance. If we were to be in the 2020 target, a perfect score is 16 points for ELA. The on-track status earns us 12 out of 16. So you see where I have status 12.0. That represents 12 points for being in the on-track category. Progress and growth. If we see growth over time, improvement over time, we can earn progress points. If you compare 2017 to 2015, it did not go up. It's basically flat. So we did not earn any progress points. We did, however, earn growth points, and growth points means that we took kids on the entire spectrum of performance and moved them further than they were expected to move, okay, which is a good thing. So this is where that educational philosophy gets put into this score guide, so we can earn points based on our student performance and also earn points based on how far kids move. If we look at our math scores, you see this year we had a 351.5. Our average, 3-year average, 346.8. That puts us in the approaching category. If you look back at 2015, we have made good progress, not enough to earn progress points, and our kids performed if you look at the supporting data document on page 68, if you know where it's kind of hidden in there, but our kids basically performed at where they're expected to perform, not above. ELA and math those are the two areas in which we had our EOCs removed. So the 2017 numbers, that reflects a score with all of the English 2 scores removed from consideration. The math 2017 is all of the math scores with the Algebra 1 scores removed. So for ELA and math, those scores represent the 3rd through 8th grade level MAP tests, and that's all that's considered in those numbers. I did go through and try and calculate what our scores would be with those in there. We don't get those scores, so I kind of estimated based on prior year's performance. Depending on the year, our status for the year went up anywhere from 4 to 8 points. Now, that would not have gotten us to a higher status level, but it would have helped with some progress points along the way with improvement over time.
Kurt, which math did you say it represents?
That is grades 3 through 8. Grade level MAP tests. So that would not include our 8th grade algebra and high school algebra kids. In science, index this year was 379.4 for a 3-year average of 378.2, which does put us in the 2020 target category in science. That represents 5th grade science, 8th grade science, and the biology EOC assessments go into the science score. Social studies is all based on one single test, the high school government EOC test. The other three subject areas are all worth 16 points total. Because this is based on a single test, it's only worth 8. And if you look at our scores, our 3-year index for social studies is 391, which does put us in the top 2020 target category, so we do earn all 8 points for social studies. Now, how that turns into points, for English language arts, there are 16 points possible. We earned 16 through a combination of status plus progress. For math, is 16 points, we earned 12. Below that, you'll see a 16.0 HH. So we've used the term hold harmless before. Because of all the changes in the assessments and because of the removal of the Algebra 1 scores and because of the turmoil that we've had in changing tests year after year, the current APR does have a hold harmless provision in it. We earned 12 points. However, we're getting credit for 16 points because 16 points was our performance just prior to all of the assessments changing. So the hold harmless means even if your performance doesn't reflect what it did, there may be a reason for that, and so there's a little bit of a protection clause in here. So we did receive 4 additional points based on a hold harmless provision because of the problems with assessment. So in the official score category, that will be a 16. Okay? Science, we earned all 16 points because of being in the 2020 target. Social studies, we earned 8 points for being in the 2020 target. So officially on Standard 1 academic achievement, there are 56 points possible, and we've received credit for all 56 points. That was a lot. Questions on that? And that's Standard 1. We got that. Questions on Standard 1. All right. Standard 2 actually is identical, and Standard 2 is page 2, is the back page of the document. Standard 2 is subgroup achievement. This measures everything exactly the same way that we just looked at in Standard 1, only it looks at the performance of the 5 historically underperforming subgroups in the state of Missouri. And that is ELL students, free and reduced lunch students, IEP students, black students, and Hispanic students. So these are the exact same scores as Standard 1, but isolated to those 5 subgroups. You can see the performance targets here. for floor approaching on-track 2020 target. And we have the same supporting data. Now, since this is a smaller group, instead of each subject being worth 16 points, each subject is worth 4 points. Our 3-year average for ELA is 342.5, with 2017 being 340.3. The English Language Arts scores, or the English 2 EOC scores are removed. That puts us in the approaching category. Math, we have improved from 2015 significantly, but we are still at 320.5 for a 3-year average of 313.2. That puts us in the approaching category. Science, 2017, 345.5 for a 3-year average of 344.8. It puts us in the on-track category. And social studies, a 3-year average of 353.4 puts us in the on-track category. The points that those scores translate to are over on the right. ELA and math, the scores comparing 2017 to 2015 improved. So we earned some progress points for improving over that 3-year span. How that looks on the score sheet: ELA, 4 points possible. We earned 3. The hold harmless provision comes back into effect for ELA in this case. We did earn 1 hold harmless. We did receive credit for 1 point based on the hold harmless provision for 4.0 in ELA. Math, status, and progress, we earned all 4 of the points in math. Science, we earned 3 of the 4, and social studies 1.5 out of 2. So in subgroup or standard 2, there are 14 total points possible. We earned 12.5. Standard 3 is the 3rd page in that document. On the next slide, I'll explain what 3133, 34, and 3536 mean, but if you want to keep this in front of you to reference the numbers on the next slide, it will give those hopefully some context. Standard 3 is college and career readiness. This standard is worth 10 points per each one of those standard subgroups. So the top line, 3.1 through 3.3, that has to do with our students' performance on the ACT, SAT, the ASVAB, the Compass, all of the standardized tests. Basically what this means, based on how kids perform, they can earn up to a point per kid if they take the assessment and score well on it. So that 81.8, what that represents is if we have an expectation that every graduate would earn a point, we earned 81.8% of the possible points for the senior graduating class. Okay, based on their performance on the ACT, SAT, and ASVAB, we earned 81.8% of the total possible points per kid. The 3-year average for that is 77.5. If you look at the chart that I gave you, the 2020 target is a 71.5%. So we are well above that into the 2020 target, which is really good. If you look at the progress from 2017 back to 2015, we also earned a lot of progress points. So I'll show you in a second, although this is only worth 10 points, we would have liked to carry it over that 7.5 somewhere else, but we're not allowed to. So technically we earned 17.5, but only get credit for 10. The next line down, standard 3.4, is our students' performance on AP exams and in AP classes. On the TSAs, which are the technical skill attainment assessments that are given over at RTI and RTC. Our students' performance in dual credit classes, and students' performance on Project Lead the Way assessments. This is the same idea. If there's an expectation that every kid earns at least 1 point, our graduating class earns 70.9% of those total possible points. You can see from your chart, looking back, the 2020 target starts at 47.8%. So we are significantly above the top level of expectation in how our students do in this area. I think it's a real nice testament to the work being done at the high school, RTI, RTC, and the lower grades preparing them. But obviously, some of the courses in the course description book, we've done a nice job over the years of building those courses up and giving kids lots of opportunities. So we are in the 2020 target for our performance in that area, which is 10 points. We also received 2 points for progress. We also received 2 additional bonus points for the expansion of career and technical programs within the district. Because we have added some nice programs over at RTI and RTC, all of the sending schools that send kids to us receive those 2 additional bonus points on their APR, which is really nice. Now, we ended up not using them, but some will. And so that's a nice benefit of being a part of the consortium here. The bottom area, 3.5 through 3.6, is college and career placement. For this, students earn a point if they go to post-secondary education, post-secondary training, to the military, or if they are career and technical completers, in other words, taking a 3-hour sequence or more and entering the workforce. Our 2017, we had 87% of kids who did those things for a 3-year average of 88.7. If you look on the chart I provided you, the 2020 target is 90. So we do fall a bit short in our placement. That is a combination of both placement and some of the challenges in getting in contact with people. There's a little bit of both. But we are below the 2020 target. We are in the approaching category we're in the on-track category for that, which is worth 7.5 points out of 10. What that looks like then is the top line is worth 10. We earn 17.5 and we get credit for 10. 3.4, we earn 14, but we get credit for 10. And then in college and career placement, we earn 7.5. So altogether, that's 27.5 points out of total of 30 on standard 3. Questions on any of those little subgroups? Since we addressed ACT, I thought I'd slide an ACT slide in here just for your information. On the left-hand side, you can see the years going through, the numbers that were attested both at Rolla and the state. You'll notice the large jump going from 2015 to 2016. That's the year the state implemented full ACT testing across the state. You can see that when we did that, we had a slight drop in our composite scores. I will be up here in front of you for 1 more year with full senior class ACT scores. So the graduating class this year will still have them. That will be a part of our APR coming up. And then after that, it will go back to normal unless we as a district decide to do something different as far as ACT participation. But you can see our composites in the state composite there. Okay, standard 4 is attendance. You heard a lot about attendance during the school improvement program. These numbers on this chart represent the percent of students who are in attendance 90% of the time or more. So as a district for 2017, we had 91.1% of our kids were here 90% of the time or more. A 3-year average of 91.3. The percentage to get full credit for this standard is 90%. So we're above that with 91.3. So with our status, we do earn all 10 points that are given for attendance. The final standard is standard 5, graduation rate. You see up here 3 years worth of data for the 4-year, 5-year, 6-year, and 7-year graduation rates. The target we are shooting for here for the 2020 target is 92% of the kids. We do not hit 92% in any of those 4 categories. We are just below 92 in all of them. So we are in the on-track category, which is worth 22.5 points out of a possible 30. A perfect score on this is 30. However, for our 4-year plan, if you look from 2017 back to 2015, we do have a good amount of progress. So we did earn progress points equaling 22.5. We also had progress points in the 6-year graduation rate. So for this one, we are giving credit out of those 4 years for the best performance. So we do get credit on the four-year graduation rate. This standard is worth 30 points. We do get credit for all 30 points based on the status plus the progress. The final page of your packet is just kind of this overall summary of our district's APR for the last 3 years. You can see each of the 5 standards are listed with the total points possible and our performance in each of the standards over the last 3 years. So you can see we've been fairly consistent, ranging from 96.8%, 97.5%. This year we received 136 out of 140 total possible points for 97.1% of the total points. I mentioned that there are district level scores. Here are the building level scores for each of the buildings. You can see the scores for Mark Twain, Harry S. Truman, Colonel John B. Wyman, and Rolla Middle School. We did not receive calculations for Rolla Junior High and Rolla High School this year because of the EOC assessments. Any school district in which their score was impacted by 15% or more based on the removal of those EOCs, they did not calculate a building level score report for them. So their report is blank for this year. But you can see the APR percents for each of the buildings. They do have lower numbers, obviously. The elementaries do not have graduation rates, placement, AP exams, or science or social studies tests. So their points are reduced. So looking ahead here, we've talked some about some of the things going on throughout the state that impacted this year's APR. There's even more to come, and there's even a little more uncertainty around APR and some of the calculations moving forward. First of all, we have new state assessments that we'll be taking this year. So being able to compare this year's scores to previous year's scores, once again, we'll be in the boat of not really being able to compare. I think we're done with changing. That is again, I've told you many times, I think what we went through in the conversion from the grade level expectations to the Common Core state standards to the Missouri Core academic standards to the House Bill 1490 where they were all rewritten again, that process was enough that I think we're done rewriting them. No one wants to tackle that again. So I would assume we'll have consistent standards. We do have field tests coming up over the next 2 years. This year, none of our science scores will count. None of the 5th grade, 8th grade, or biology science scores will count. The tests that we're taking this year are field tests in order to help the state prepare tests that will count. Next year, we'll be saying the same thing for the government EOC. That will be a field test. None of those scores will count. Now, what does that mean? That means that it will be several years before I'm able to stand in front of you and say that we have 3 consecutive years of data for student performance measurements as the APR is built to use. The English and algebra, this is year 1 of not having scores for those EOCs. That will be true for the next 2 years. We will still be missing scores in at least one box there. Science, we start this year with all missing scores. That will stay in there for 3 years. And social studies, we will have no scores the following year. That will stay as a part of the APR for a few years. So how the future APR data looks and how this is used is a question that it's not been answered yet. We've not gotten to that point yet, but that will have to be answered is how are we going to calculate an APR with that amount of missing student performance data when that accounts for half of the score. So that's to come. I'm sure I will be visiting with you more about that. We have had a lot of discussions this year about our continued participation in the optional EOC tests. The only EOC tests that we're required to give are biology, government, Algebra 1, and English 2. We continue to give English 1, we continue to give geometry, we continue to give Algebra 2. The participation rates of those have dropped so low across the state. There aren't many schools still giving them. So the data that we get back, if we want to compare ourselves to how we're doing across the state, it's about a 25% to a third of districts give any of those assessments anymore. So the data that we get, we're questioning whether it's worth the testing time that we put kids through to get. What I've asked them to do is, if we're not going to give those, is we are going to have a plan for comprehensive finals in those courses so that we can have some performance information about how our kids are doing. We've held on to those optional assessments for several years. It's time to at least talk about whether we're getting anything out of them for the amount of testing that we ask kids to participate in the spring. And so as we start getting closer to assessments, I'd like to maybe have the high school or provide some input. We are interested in whether or not the board is still interested in us participating in those. None of the data of those tests is in this APR. It's difficult to compare because we have no idea what kids are taking it. So, and the comparability from year to year has been difficult to maintain. So I'm not sure of the usefulness there. Also this year, because we are giving all new tests, we will have delayed results. Typically we get results over the summer. With these new tests, we're going to be giving them. They will then take all of the scores once kids throughout the year have taken them and do the level setting for the below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced performance levels. What that means is there will be no EOC tests available for us to take over the summer. They are shutting down EOC testing so they can do all of the scoring, which means for summer school, some of our classes that take the EOC will not be available this year. This is a one-year delay, or a one-year, it's 1 year where scores will be delayed as they set the new levels on the new assessments. So we will be behind the usual schedule again next fall. So just so you're aware there. Now, the future of Missouri accountability. We were already talking about the next iteration of MSIP, what it looks like. The proposals there were to move away from a pure data model. You'll look, everything in here is backed up by numbers and scores and performance. Previous versions of the NSIP, we got into resource standards, process standards. Basically, are you doing things right, and do you have the right things in your district? We went away from that model to just a pure performance model, which you saw here tonight, and there was a feeling that maybe we need to move back toward process resource standards. With changes occurring at the department, with changes in leadership at the department, it's difficult to tell where the future of accountability is in the next phase of the MSIP planning. So whether I ever give a presentation like this again, what this looks like, I assume we will, because it will take a couple of years to get a new one. But the future of Missouri accountability, I would consider that unknown at this point as to what that would look like. So that's a lot. Looking back through there, 5 standards, 140 points total. If you recall any of the early parts, if questions are still there, or later parts, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about this. Or I could let you read the 106. There is a 106-page instruction manual. If you'd like to read the instruction manual too, I've got it here with me.
So I understand the need for us to go through this process to be accountable to the state, but through their, I shouldn't say through their failure, through the failure of this system to maintain a consistent method of assessment, it's failing us, I believe, as a district to be able to say, are we doing better? Are we doing worse? Are we on the right? I mean, just going through this process of points and all that and hold harmless, at some point it becomes just a little bit ridiculous, to me, as an outsider. And I appreciate your knowledge of this and helping us through this. But how can we measure, and should we be doing something more just within our district to measure accountability regardless?
Yeah.
Whether the state's able to do that. But, and I know we do some things, but should we be looking even more so towards that, some method, a process that would, at least when we don't get it from them, we have it from within.
So going back to the early 2000s, we were an early adopter in the common formative assessments across the district, and those were a part of the professional learning communities movement, in which it was designed to make sure that when students take third grade math, that it didn't matter if they took third grade math at Mark Twain and in classroom A, in classroom B, or classroom C, or at Wyman in classroom A, B, and C, while none of the experiences would be identical, that we would have identified the key components that we are going to teach kids in third grade math across the entire district. There's an agreed upon, what do we want students to know? One of the key questions, what do we want students to learn? And so the common formative assessments was a way for us not only to measure that, but force some commonality and accountability across the entire district, so that when kids move from building to building, which we have some high mobility at the elementary level, that they don't end up in three different, wildly different places based on teachers teaching at their own pace or their own objectives. So we did that in the early 2000s, and we gave quarterly common assessments, and we measured in each classroom how kids did on the objectives covered during that quarter. From the early 2000s until this past year, that system was in place all the way through. We moved from paper assessments to online assessments, but the general structure was still the same. So all throughout there, that was an attempt on our part to measure locally how are our kids doing on those objectives in every class, in every subject that we've agreed that they need to know when they go through there. With the number of times the standards changed, what happened was the common assessments had to be rewritten every time the standards changed. And over time, the tools that we had at our disposal to measure student growth and performance became a lot more sophisticated as far as packages we could purchase. And this year, what we are doing is we are moving away from the locally created common assessments to packages that will measure where students are starting the year, and then periodically through the year measure them on their skills and be able to tell us where kids are growing or where kids are falling behind. So this model is less, I would say, Jamie, on accountability and more on a student-by-student understanding of what each student's strengths and weaknesses are and how we might be able to address each student where they are struggling and where they are excelling. So we are piloting 3 different assessment tools this year, spread through second grade up through the junior high at this point. And teachers are now giving those, and we are trying to assess, are these new tools giving us information that we never had before to help us better understand where our kids are succeeding and where they are failing. And I would say that's been consistent. I think we are less reliant on state assessment scores now than we were in the mid-2000s when it came with designations of schools in improvement in which kids could transfer out if your scores weren't high, in the No Child Left Behind years. Back then, they were vitally important, and frankly, we probably focused on them, well, maybe more than was right, but it was the climate at the time. I think we have a less reliance on state assessment scores simply because, just what you said, they've been so unreliable, and we don't get information that really helps us. So we have tried to do it locally. We have tried to follow the model, and we have tried to get better year after. That's a long-winded answer for. We have relied on local assessments. We are currently now trying to transition to the next phase of local assessments, which is more of a growth model. Where are kids starting and how far are we moving them? That's kind of our focus now.
And that makes a lot of sense, that there are assessments that measure where kids are starting, how are they progressing, what are their deficiencies, their needs, how can we address those? But still, you have that baseline of where they started and where they end up at the end of the year, and that gives us a measure.
It's what we're trying to get better at. And the new assessments that we do now, they don't measure how much of third grade materials do you know. They're adaptive tests that zero in on the performance and tell us in reading this fifth grader is performing at a third grade level, and here are the skills they're missing. While in math, they're performing at a seventh grade, third month level, and here's the next thing they're ready to learn. They've got this, here's what's next for them. What we're trying to what we're trying to assess through this pilot is which tool gives us the best information, which tool gives us the best resources to address what it is we're learning about the kids, which helps us move the kids along further, and which one can, the next times we take the assessment, which ones give us the best information about how much the student did or did not grow in between that time of instruction.
And there's in our state, we participated in the accreditation and assessment task force to make recommendations to DEC because of the top 10 by 20 performing states, those 2020 targets. Very few of them have a department like DEC that actually accredits school districts. And so the first push or nudge, I guess, was why do we have to be accredited by DEC? Well, that was a non-negotiable. So then you see, well, on the accreditation side, with the new evolution of MSIP 6, whatever that's going to be, can we come off of the pure number test data, student performance driven, and some of the other factors that we would use to measure what a good school is? So you heard Craig talk about the resource and process standards as a way of demonstrating our school is more than just kids performing on tests. But MSIP 6 is, like you said, there's a little bit of confusion that's happening at that level now. So we don't know what progress is going to be made. We're kind of in a wait and see mode. And on the assessment side, we've been invited to participate in an assessment consortium, which they're looking at creating our own real-time assessments. Is still a little bit abstract to me, and I'm sure it is to many, but we're testing kids where they're at in real time and not really worrying about meeting particular parameters. So if the kid's ready, they test. If they're not, then they don't. It doesn't matter what grade level you're at. It matters what standards that you're mastering. And that whole, there's a cost to that if we were to participate in that. And the thought would be that once we have enough school districts participating in those pilots, that we would be able to provide information to DEC saying, look, this works. Will you consider this? If you're not going to consider coming off the compliance piece to accreditation relative to student performance and standards. So there's an email in my box now. We've been involved with that the whole time, and with the changes again that are happening, we really don't know what's going to happen. You saw a lot of question marks up there, so we'll hopefully know by spring. But we have been through, our teachers have been through several different assessments, aligning those assessments to ever-changing standards, and we really just want to break from so much change. I mean, you for somebody like RD to want to compare last year's performance data to this year, you can't do that, but people want to draw that conclusion because it's a completely different test, and we're going to be in we're going to be in several more years of data before we're at something that we can use as comparison.
So this year will kind of be a baseline year for the new assessment. And so,
Seems that the ACT is the one constant, the one
I would agree.
stable measure that we have access to and that we can rely on in a sense. And I wonder if we don't need to revisit talking about that as far as giving all juniors the opportunity to.
I think
take
so.
it for multiple reasons, not just to measure, but give kids that opportunity.
I think it's something worth talking about and considering. We do not have the ability to do that this spring. We had to get signed up in early September for that to happen. But
there's a big cost to that too.
there is a cost. But looking ahead to next year, I think we would all be certainly open to talking about whether we want to pick that up as a district or not. We do have that option of doing so.
Do you remember what that? I was going to say, was it 20,000?
I was thinking 15 to 20 was the number I had in mind.
And we had 68% of our kids were taking ACT.
Typically 2/3 is a pretty standard number of our graduates that take it.
So it's not a huge expenditure, but it was something we needed to commit to, and we weren't ready to do that.
A few districts did, most did not. Most are like us when it got canceled, and but there are some that did. So I think it's worth considering.
Yeah, I liked Corey Ray. Dr. Ray gave the example of measuring his students at their reading level. What percentage of kids are reading at their grade level. I don't know who determines that, what that grade level reading should be, but
Sure.
That's a good example to me of a measure.
Right.
Of saying, where are we? Where have we gone?
So the new assessments that we're testing out are in math, reading, and English. Some are also available in science, although that doesn't build on itself so much year to year. But in those three key areas, reading level, math ability, and English language arts, writing and grammar and all of those, these new tools are designed to measure it. And so we're interested to see, again, how the information comes out, if it's usable, if it helps us get better. We're looking for a long-term answer that may give us more information than teacher-written common assessments at each grade level, which vary in length and complexity based on the group of teachers that are writing them.
Thank you.
I appreciate your kind attention during the APR. I know it's long, I know it's detail heavy, but I appreciate your kind attention during all that. So,
Yeah.